No, it's not a funeral, so I hope it's not going to be as quiet as that. Good evening, everyone. I'm Don Pinchbeck. I'm a Life Fellow, Trustee and Board Member of the RSA. And for my sins, I'm a Trustee and Board Member of Emmaus UK and Chair of Emmaus Enterprises. Before we begin, because you're all intelligent and responsible people, I know I don't have to ask you to make sure your mobile phones are switched to silent. Do I? Well, any offenders will be cast into outer darkness where there is wailing and gnashing of teeth. In other words, after the event, when we go down for drinks in the Benjamin Franklin room, you will be excluded. So there is the warning. So unless you're very sure, please double check. We're live streaming tonight, so welcome to all our online viewers. If you want to get involved in the discussion on Twitter, the hashtag is #RSA Image. It's my great pleasure to welcome you all here for this evening's special event, the 2013 Albert Medal presentation. The RSA has been awarding the Albert Medal for innovation in the fields of creativity and social improvement since 1864. Previous winners have included Faraday, Marconi, Orville Wright, Sir Winston Churchill, Frank Whittle, Barnes Wallis, Tim Berners-Lee, Tim Smith of Edenfane, and Professor Stephen Hawking, almost all of whom were fellows. The awarding of the Albert Medal has gradually evolved over the years. It is now recognised as a means of identifying and rewarding unsung heroes who have just got on with making the world a better place. Tonight's Albert Medal winner, chosen by the RSA Fellowship, is such a person. It is my great pleasure to introduce you to our distinguished speaker for this evening, Selwyn Image, founder and vice president of Emmaus UK. We're looking forward to hearing from Selwyn, and afterwards he will be joined on stage by the RSA's Chief Executive, Matthew Taylor, who will direct the discussion. Selwyn has a background in international marketing and in areas I'm not allowed to mention, and also worked as a Justice of the Peace for 10 years. In 2008, Selwyn was awarded a well-earned CBE for his charity work. Tonight, around the UK, over 500 men and women who were homeless, who had lost everything, are now happy, well-fed, comfortable, but more importantly, learning new work skills, recovering their self-esteem, and preparing themselves for life back as confident, contributing members of society. This is thanks to Emmaus, and therefore thanks to Selwyn Image, the founder of Emmaus in the UK. So what is key to the success of Emmaus? The companions, as they call themselves because they find companionship, restore their own self-esteem and self-confidence by helping those who are worse off than themselves. As a trustee of Emmaus for the past 4 years, I've seen the transforming power of the Emmaus model at first hand. It is based on practicality, tough love, and at its heart, an inspired vision. There is a long-running RSA project called Whole Person Recovery, WPR, which has been heavily researched and documented and is currently demonstrating some startling success in helping drug addicts re-enter normal life. Emmaus doesn't have the in-depth theoretical background of the RSA's model. Across the world, it has just got on with making whole person recovery happen. In the UK, over the past 20 years, it has helped literally thousands to recover their lives, and across the world, hundreds of thousands. Perhaps due to the desire to give and to help, whenever an RSA fellow meets an RSA trustee, within minutes they find they're on the same wavelength. It is no surprise that the Chair and CEO of Emmaus UK and many Emmaus trustees are committed RSA fellows. After you've heard Selwyn speak, and if you'd like to know more, perhaps become a trustee or a volunteer yourself, now is the opportunity. Please approach any of the Emmaus representatives here tonight. Not expecting this, but Emmaus representatives, will you please stand so that fellows know who to approach? Can I ask you please to stand, the Emmaus representatives? So please note the one nearest you, and if you don't recognise any of them, hopefully you'll recognise me so you can buttonhole me as well. Thank you. Selwyn, I'd now like to ask you to join me It now gives me great pleasure to present you, Selwyn Image, with the 2013 Albert Medal for your great achievement in tackling homelessness and social exclusion through social enterprise. And I'm also... Well, that was a great round of applause, but now there's another one for the even more important thing. Selwyn, I'd like to present you with the scroll that enrolls you as a lifetime fellow of the RSA.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Just like a small bottle of Lafrague, but you know.
You should be so lucky, Selwyn. Anyway, I'd now like to invite Selwyn to present his lecture. Thank you.
Well, thank you, Don, very much for such a generous introduction. As you may have gathered, the Emmaus movement continues to travel hopefully. And I thought it might be worthwhile to share with you some of the milestones in our journey, some lessons we've learnt over the past 23 years, and some of the directions we would like to take as we try to make at least a small part of our world a better place in which to live. It would be a strange person indeed, I think, or a peculiar genius who didn't feel humbled at appearing amongst the roll of so many distinguished recipients of this award. For many of us are, in the words of Bernard of Chartres, like dwarves perched on the shoulders of giants, and only thus able to see more and further than the latter, not at all because of the acuteness of our sight and the stature of our body, but because we are carried aloft and elevated by their magnitude. Never was this truer, I think, than in the case of Abbé Pierre. When he founded the first Emmaus community in 1949 in post-war Paris, he had no idea he was founding either a major social enterprise or an international movement. So far as he was concerned, he was simply responding to a shocking and unacceptable situation and doing what he felt was right and necessary. His experience as priest, resistance hero, and parliamentarian had molded him to fight injustice, and his activist nature was such that it had to be something practical. The level of homelessness and unemployment in the capital was for him a scandal, and it was a scandal that demanded dynamic action. In his case, and with crucial input from the first 20 homeless and unemployed people with whom he shared his life and home, he began collecting donations of furniture, clothing, and household goods for sale in a large wooden shed erected in what had formerly been the presbytery garden. Other collected items like metal, rags, and paper were sorted, bundled, and recycled. The aim was to provide a home and a living for the companions, as the 20 were called, and to use any proceeds thereafter to help those worse off than themselves. This kind of thinking was so much a part of his nature and training, I think, that the originality of creating a charity that worked, restoring self-respect to those who had lost it by providing a supportive home and meaningful work, and in the process turning grudging receivers into motivated givers, barely occurred to him. Similarly, in 1954, when successfully marshalling the entire population of France to address the scandal of homelessness, during a hard winter in which an old lady had been found frozen to death in the streets of Paris, still clutching an eviction order in her hand, he seemed to regard the national response as normal and to be expected. Injustice was intolerable. Injustice had to be fought. Even the name he chose for the movement, Emmaus, taken from one of his favorite stories in the New Testament, when two disciples regained hope and purpose through an encounter with the risen Christ on the road to a small village called Emmaus, was intrinsic to his character and to his thinking. I should perhaps say at this point that Emmaus has always been a secular organization. Abbé Pierre insisted on this. But its history, I think, has clearly drawn heavily on a Christian ideology from which much of modern humanitarianism has grown. Nor, however, should we exclude the similar tenets of the world's other great faith traditions that have also contributed to this. Today, the movement he created is one of the largest NGOs in France, second only in size to the Red Cross, and hugely important there in the provision of creative and practical solutions to the problem of homelessness. Today, worldwide, across 37 countries, there are 327 self-supporting communities and more than 440 partnership organizations, mostly non-English speaking. My own first encounter with Emmaus was in 1960 as a modern languages student in Cambridge. Abbé Pierre was a fervent internationalist who believed that by enabling students to travel and work together, he could do something practical to assist reconciliation in post-Second World War Europe. To this end, he used the Emmaus communities in Paris to invite university students from around Europe to spend their summer vacation working there alongside companions. For 3 months, I salvaged coal from cellars, cleared houses and apartments, tore papers, bundled rags. We were a pretty motley crew. With me were 2 other students, as well as around 20 French companions, a Benedictine worker priest, and the community leader, who left shortly after I did with the entire takings of the community. The companions came from every walk of life and every level of society. Many were alcoholics, nearly all ex-servicemen, a number had been in prison, 1 or 2 were redundant executives fallen on hard times. Nearly all had significant psychological problems or trauma to overcome. We worked in groups of 3, a driver, not always totally sober, and 2 companions. Despite occasional lapses for which poor management was usually responsible, there was a sense of striving and purpose, and that what we were doing, and nobody thought of it then as social enterprise, was both right and a meaningful path towards changed lives and renewed purpose. Even we students were proud to be known as companions. After 3 months, I returned to my studies, speaking a form of French that raised some eyebrows and suppressed smiles at my university oral examination. Thereafter, for the next 30 years, I got on with my career as an international marketing consultant and forgot about Emmaus until 1989, when homeless people started to appear on the streets of Cambridge. A local soup kitchen was set up, and because of my business background in market research, I was asked to explore fundraising for a night shelter. Talking to the homeless people living on the street and in the makeshift camp that they had set up by the river, I learnt about how they felt about night shelters. Not good. At that time, they were dreaded as places where you would be robbed whilst sleeping, even if you were able to do so, surrounded by sickness, drunkenness, and violence. A few days later, I was challenged by a very lucid but angry homeless man who shot down every fundraising idea I had in flames. And eventually I became so irritated, I asked him what on earth he did want, as all I seemed to be hearing was what he didn't like. And his answer changed my life. I would have thought it obvious to someone of your so-called intelligence, he sneered. I want somewhere I can work, where I feel I belong, and where I can recover my self-respect. These last 2 words took me back those 30 years. I tried to buy time, because I knew I was lost, and told him about a French organization called Emmaus, which did just that, but that I had no idea if it still existed or not. His next remark put the seal on my fate. "And what the are you going to do about it?" he asked. Emmaus UK was born. The next day I looked in the Paris telephone directory, contacted Abbé Pierre, enlisted his instant and enthusiastic support, and set about trying to set up an Emmaus community in the UK. 24 years later, in 2013, we were about to reach a key milestone of 25 Emmaus communities up and running in the UK, with a further 9 active development projects. Each has cost around £1.5 million to set up and fund until economic self-sufficiency is achieved. Our focus is primarily on communities and international solidarity rather than housing provision or political activism, which is a significant activity in France. Nevertheless, the UK is now the largest Emmaus movement outside France and the fastest growing. And independent external research has shown that for every £1 invested in an established community, £11 are generated in social, environmental, and economic returns. In 2012-2013 alone, the 21 Emmaus communities participating in this research saved the public purse an estimated £6 million. This equates to an average of £2.2 million per community for a non-trading investment of £198,000 each year. When we wrote our first strategic plan, our objective was to emulate Emmaus in France, and many other countries outside Europe, I should say, as a non-partisan agent provocateur to government, as well as a significant provider in addressing both the problems of homelessness as well as its causes. To do this, we considered that around 100 communities would be necessary in the UK. That's some 30 fewer than in France, but roughly one in every conurbation. We hoped that Emmaus would rapidly become part of the infrastructure of every local community where it was present, and set this as a 10-year target in the hope that we might actually achieve half this number. Personally, I was convinced that the simplicity and elegance of the solution we offered, combined with the extensive experience of the movement in France, was something of a no-brainer that would lead to government and industry's enthusiastic support. How naive can you be? Without a charismatic national figure and a political heavyweight to lead us, it has been the hard slog of learning and relearning, one by one, the old lessons of business building. Only in this case, it is a social enterprise where the proponents of social values have often fought fiercely with those more interested in the values of enterprise. Largely because it's been my experience that this dichotomy is not uncommon in the third sector, I thought it might be helpful to share with you some of the problems we encountered in the hope of easing the way for others and, who knows, maybe assisting our own future growth towards a mission and objective we still consider feasible. Essentially, there are four main areas I'd like to cover with a common red thread. In no particular order, these are management and management quality, the time factor, critical mass, and funding. The red thread is the totally different perspectives of government and commerce, particularly in the area of social enterprise, with government not unnaturally veering towards the social and business towards the enterprise. To complicate matters further, there is the addition, as I've already mentioned, of often fierce differences of motivation within the sector itself. As Pascal Riley and wisely observed, the heart has its reasons that reasons know nothing about. So let me share some of what we have had to learn in each area in turn. It would be nice if they were all distinct and separate, but I'm afraid, as in real life, they often overlap. Our first discovery in the field of management was our own ignorance, and we had to learn a number of lessons and suffer the consequences of our own mistakes, as well as those of the people we were able to recruit. When we started, small charities found it hard to attract skilled managers. Indeed, we didn't seem to be alone in attracting some psychological casualties who were simply not robust enough to survive in the private sector, and whose needs often echoed those of the homeless people we were seeking to support. An additional complication was their ability to deploy behavioral systems to muddy the waters and protect themselves from accountable decision-taking. We learned that commercial disciplines and skills are not always transferable, and it has been a steep learning curve for us to attract and retain the quality of people we have in place today, able to reserve the often conflicting requirements of the social and the enterprise without lapsing into the protective cocoon of process bureaucracy. Falling between government agencies as we do, we've often failed to reconcile their own differing standards and internal requirements. More seriously, perhaps, we have also encountered government agencies seeking to exercise control through standards sometimes inappropriate to either their needs or ours, and accompanied by tiresome corporate gobbledygook more reminiscent of remaindered management books than serious guides or mission statements. More dangerously, these sometimes have seemed to me to be used in such a way as to provide alibi documentation for avoiding decisions and passing the parcel. Social impact bonds are one particular frustration to which I will return later. The second lesson we have learnt is the importance of time and perspective in healing damaged lives and minds. One of Murphy's laws tells us that everything takes twice as long as originally planned, and this has been our experience too. Repairing people's lives, helping the recovery of self-respect are not clear-cut tasks or a short-term or predictable business. And the idea that a formerly homeless person with all the complex psychological and social variables involved can be rehabilitated within a fixed time frame, as is in the case with social impact bonds, is frankly nonsense. Equally, if one has to deal with ministers and civil servants who have not been in post long enough to know their subject in depth, in a political environment that appears increasingly short-term and knee-jerk in its thinking, there are few grounds for hope in deploying common-sense solutions, even when cost-effectiveness and clear benefits can be demonstrated. It is perhaps significant to note in this context that even though some key ministers have remained in place during the current government's term in office, the churn of senior civil servants has been extremely high across Whitehall. Our third area of painful learning and discovery has been critical mass. Like the RSA, we seek to enrich society through ideas and action. Within our chosen field, I think we do this fairly well. But we could do it better if we got more support and there were fewer people passing the buck. It's hardly surprising, perhaps, that one is rarely listened to or funded before a certain level of size has been achieved. I recall one MP at a select committee asking me how we could possibly be of any value if he'd not heard of us. The other hard lesson is that by and large, God still favours the big battalions. The bigger and better known you are, the more and better the people you attract. I must at this stage exclude and pay tribute to the serious professional charitable trusts and foundations who've supported us since the beginning and over the past 23 years. Their questioning has always been tough, their evaluation process and standards as rigorous as any I've ever encountered in industry, but never have they been risk-averse or unresponsive to a good case well argued. We, government and the country at large, owe them a huge debt. Maybe government has more to learn from them, in our field at least, than from many of the commercial advisors it employs. The fourth area of discovery and deception leads on from this. In funding, government rules are not commercial rules. It is clear that government cannot fund charities, but it seems equally clear to me that they should invest in cost-effective initiatives that save them money. You may recall that I said earlier that independent research, commissioned incidentally by ourselves and supported by the Para Foundation, had demonstrated a return on government's own measure of social investment more than 11 times what it cost. A social and economic return of over £11 for every £1 invested. I know of no other enterprise, commercial or social, with such a return. I also know from my own business experience that a sound case, well argued, gets investment. So what is the point of social impact bonds, seemingly tailor-made for social enterprises like our own, requiring rehabilitation within a fixed time period, when our level of return on social investment is already satisfying government's own rigorous measure of cost effectiveness? And why, when this is pointed out, does an inappropriate measure continue to fly in the face of an equally robust standard? And who is going to take responsibility when the buck can so easily be passed from one department to another? Another crucial element in critical mass and the big battalions is what it might enable us to do in the future. Many of you will be aware of the RSA's interest and involvement in trying to reduce the currently unacceptable levels of ex-prisoner reoffending. This is not a simple problem, I know. One thing, for instance, that I learnt during my service as a JP was that the current prevalence of releasing prisoners on licence after half or even less of the sentence imposed by the courts means that very little meaningful educational or remedial work of any kind can be undertaken in prisons. Even if there were enough teachers and trainers in the prison service, which in my time there weren't. Indeed, whenever our particular bench visited prisons in the east of England, we were implored by prison staff to hand down the maximum sentences possible, not on the grounds of deterrence or punishment, but because we were told that nothing can be achieved in terms of altering behaviour or even improving or enabling reading or writing skills in less than 4 months. Now, these days, an 8-month sentence, resulting in 4-month served time, requires a pretty serious offence. Now, if we have 100 Emmaus communities, we could both place more ex-offenders in locations nearer to their own homes and also fill their time with meaningful work and values. Street homelessness being what it is, you will understand that we have a fairly high proportion of companions who have served terms in prison and who can now act as positive agents for change as well. But of course, without a large number of communities, we would run the risk of simply creating a new form of open prison. I'm also aware that the numbers are so huge that this would only be one remedy among many, but there is a leverage factor there too, and it would work. And consider the potential effectiveness and added value to our proven experience in this area of an alliance with 27,000 fellows of the RSA in terms of influence and potential achievement. I am not saying that together we would solve the problem, but I'm pretty sure that we could put a considerable dent in it. Another area close to my heart is that of military veterans. I foresee a time when there will be a need to support veterans who've become homeless after discharge or redundancy through post-traumatic stress, difficulty in adjusting from service to civilian life, and a number of other related but specific causes. We already have around 10% of companions with a military background. Personally, I could see a particular benefit for even specialist veterans communities where such people could be supported back into society, and one where RSA members with a commercial background could play an important role in terms of training and employment opportunities. Last, but by no means least, I think cooperation with the RSA on this and other matters, think youth unemployment, for example, could lead to a more fruitful relationship with government as well as industry. Say nothing of cost-effective solutions, critical mass but not partisan mass, symbiotic expertise, common values. Mindful always that a picture is worth 1,000 words, I tried to think of an analogy that might best describe such a scenario. And the first thought that came into my mind was that of the hippopotamus and the oxpecker. You may recall that the oxpecker lives off the parasites on the hippo's body in what seems to be an ideal partnership. In fact, however, I'm told that the relationship might actually be semi-parasitic, with the small bird keeping wounds open on the hippo's back to facilitate access to its source of nourishment. Perhaps not. And I'm not sure either how governments would like being referred to as hippopotami, but still. A bright researcher in our office suggested pilotfish. One species leads whales to plankton. Another, I understand, cleans sharks' teeth for them. Not unattractive conceptually, but again, probably not wholly appropriate. And then I remembered a conversation with our founder, Abbé Pierre. Asked how he managed the relationship of Emmaus France with government so successfully. He told me that he thought it very important to be a non-partisan flea in their ear, adding that it was critically important to know when to stop. I can relate to that, and it also seems a pretty apt analogy too, as well as good advice. So I'm going to stop there too, except for one essential tribute. Much of our growth has been facilitated by good people who've acted as our ambassadors and high-level networkers. Some are here tonight, and I'd like to pay a special thank you to Terry, Peter, George, John, and Dom. Additionally, both the RSA's and our own UK development has been achieved through the dedication and expertise of many volunteers. Hundreds, in our case, thousands in yours. Collectively, they constitute the giants on whose shoulders we dwarves have been able to stand. So my further thanks and tributes to them and to you all.
Selwyn, congratulations, and thank you for that great speech. I've got 2 or 3 questions, and then we'll open it up to the floor. So my first question is, if I was asked you to sum up what is at the heart of the Emmaus methodology that makes it so powerful, what is the one key ingredient, the unique selling proposition, if you like, what would that be?
I think the reintroduction of self-respect and striving into charity, almost as it were the rediscovery or the empowerment of social enterprise, and giving full meaning to both sides of that. I remember, I don't know whether I should say this or not, but I will anyway. I asked Norman Tebbit if he would give me a bicycle to raffle for Emmaus as the best living example I knew of an on-your-bike charity. He thought it might be sensitive and so declined. But I think the fact that it makes sense. It doesn't humiliate people as grudging receivers of sometimes, inadequate state bounty. And it actually gives people a chance to work their own back with self-respect. There was a French saying, it was Boileau, it said that if a man's lost his self-respect, he's lost everything. And that goes for women too. And that's the USP, I think.
And what happens if people don't live up to your expectations in Emmaus? Because this is a tough love approach, if you like. It's something which it's not something for nothing, it's something for something.
Well, Abbé Pierre was always insistent on that. He said, in the words certainly of his Catholic faith, reminded us of the forgiveness is not a 7 times business, it is a 70 times 7, because learning is a very long-term, sometimes a constrained purpose. We have somebody in the first community now, in Cambridge, who took 20 years to get his head around himself, but the work he's doing now is worth every one of those things. We are insistent that if somebody robs a community or something like that, they answer to the law, they do whatever they have to do, but then they can come back.
And isn't it, therefore, in a sense, just the burden that you have to carry for the rigour of your process that it's not going to fit government? I mean, it's difficult to imagine a government funding programme which says you can have your reward in 20 years. We'll fund you to work with this person for 20 years and then you can get the money in 20 years. I mean,
I understand that, but what I don't understand is, because they say 2 years, but the fact is that from day one, when a guy has come into the community, he is contributing to a return on social investment of 11 times. It's an extraordinary return. They are working, they are useful citizens, they're signing off job seekers allowance. They are really, yes, they have their own internal problems, yes, they're working their way through, but they are part of an organisation that is saving government money from day one.
I'm interested in the idea that the charity is about homelessness, because when you listening to your speech, actually the people that you deal with, the homelessness is merely the symptom of the problem. The problem is that they've come out of the armed forces without a sense of what to do next, or skills, or they've been traumatised by their experience, drug or alcohol addiction, mental health. Do you think it's useful to talk about homelessness as the problem when in fact it is nearly always a symptom of some other problem?
I think street homelessness is an end result of a number of things. And actually, the most common military example I know is that a guy will come out of the services having done his 16 years or had to leave for medical reasons, and his wife has not been used to seeing him for more than 3 months of every year for the past 16 years, and he goes home and he's around a great deal more than he ever was, and a marriage, might start creaking. He could well be made redundant. Generally speaking, military people of that nature would say, right, well, you have the house, I'll go and find lodgings and do something. Then he's made redundant. He gets into the no address, no job, no address symbol, and he gets down onto the street. It's that sort of event, marriages breaking up. So homelessness can come through one of really quite a wide number of things. Yes, there are other symptoms of people having, as it were, fallen through or below the net. But street homelessness is a particularly savage manifestation of.
But we should understand street homelessness as a symptom rather than. There are very few people whose only problem is that they're homeless. Is that right?
Correct, absolutely right. Yes, because if it wasn't before, it certainly becomes it. Certainly when you've been sleeping on the street for 3 nights, sofa surfing doesn't become too much of an option because you smell so highly that sometimes your friends are not terribly willing to have you in. And it leads and it triggers all sorts of behavioural things, of sheer survival mode that are just not attractive at all.
Can I finally ask you, before we open up to the rest of the room, you've been working directly in this sphere now for a quarter of a century, but you must have been considering these issues throughout your life because you were volunteering first 50 years ago. What do you think is happening to our attitudes to the most disadvantaged in society? There is a strong view now that we are becoming harsher in our view, that we 25, 30 years ago, unemployment seemed to be a problem of the labour market. We now assume it's a problem of the unemployed, for example. Do you sense a harshening in our attitude, or is it the reverse? Is it that in a sense we are realising that we need a welfare state which has this kind of rigour that you have in your process, that just kind of trying to help people without demanding anything back never worked?
I think for me anyway, it started in the 80s where there were a whole series of business mantra going along lines like nice guys come second, and there was a sort of a creeping materialism in people's attitudes and market forces and some aspects perhaps of what was attributed to Thatcherism, whether it was or not, I'm not sure. But my personal view, but it is a personal view, is that with the decline of religious values with a small r, there's a sort of latent NIMBYism that has grown, and it has become, in many senses, a more selfish world, possibly because the extremes of hardship and affluence have widened, or the gap between them. I mean, it's a constant source of surprise to me. I spent 6 months in the United States about 15 years ago, and I was in a company trying to turn it round, and Emmaus was just starting. And this is a country, the richest country in the world, with 25% of its population living below the poverty line. And there was my entire department, which would have, I think, frankly, if I'd done it, resigned the day after to start an Emmaus community because it engaged people's value system. And I think in one sense, it is perhaps a bastion among the people of many faiths and none who work with us at the moment, that this is actually a return to, what is decent, true and honest, to use the advertising standards code.
Great, thank you very much. Okay, so we'll take some questions. If you could wait for the roving microphone to come to you, which will happen very quickly, and if you could give us your name, that would be great.
Hi, I'm Lee. I'm a comedian and a Londoner. I think it's only fair to start if a question is quite close to where we are geographically. If we walked 5 minutes down the road after our drinks this evening, we'd meet several hundred homeless people at Lincoln's Inn Fields, consuming tea and sandwiches relentlessly, gaining weight over time with apparently little prospect. So if you were invited, if you were going to be the homeless commissioner or the czar, what would you do? What would be your kind of remedies? Whether it's on a personal basis, any one of us, or a bit more strategically, what sort of things would you come up with, please?
Thank you.
Well, First of all, I don't think one should forget the amazing work that St Martin in the Fields does in this particular area, and they have upped their effort and the ante there, I think, very, very considerably in the past few years, and admirably in my view. The trouble is, I suspect there's no absolute solution to the problem, because you can never absolutely resolve a problem. I do know that in France, at least, where quite seriously Emmaus is known as well as Oxfam is here, say, and where it is absolutely part of every local community or region, there does seem to be an attitude and an engagement with the social services and all the things that governments do very worthily to try and get people back into some form of structured things. In the city of Paris, for example, I think I'm right in saying that the city government pulled together all the charities, Salvation Army, Secours Catholique, Emmaus, CAFOD, and said, okay, you're better at this sort of stuff than we are. We will fund you to 90%. Here are the agencies, here are the means that we want to do, and the programs and the social workers to get people back into work. Let's do something together along that line. And I think, and there are squads that go out at night identifying homeless people and street homeless to see if they can establish, some don't want it, but seeking to establish pathways and bridges back into the other system. We can't do it on our own. No one person can do it. But I do believe that some sort of combination of government and at major local government level, perhaps, and the combination of the charities. I mean, the Salvation Army is enormously experienced in this sort of work and has been doing it. There's a seminal book on homelessness written by General Booth, Poverty in England and the Way Out, written in 1864, where the market research there is staggering, and the statistics that are revealed, quite shocking. So it's not going to be an overnight business, but I think Paris has got some very interesting examples to follow. They incidentally say that if they had the money that we threw at the problem under the Blair government, they would have been able to do a great deal more than they have done. Yeah.
Do you think, sorry, Selwyn, but because you talked about organisations working together and you've got a lot of experience in the sector, and there are thousands of homelessness charities. Freud talks about the narcissism of small differences, and do you think the voluntary sector is itself guilty sometimes of failing to join forces because everybody wants to argue that their own particular solution is 1% better than other people's?
Yes.
Okay. Thank you for that. There's somebody here. There's somebody here at the front. Thank you.
I have one comment to make, which is that...
Could you tell us your name, sorry?
Sorry, Judy Hillman. One comment to make, and that is that it's, not only St Martin's in the Field, but churches in the area I live in northwest London. They do one night a week from the beginning of November for 3 months, and so that the homeless know they can go to the churches in an order, and they get supper, a mattress, a bed. And judging by St Mary's Primrose Hill, it's a bed with a counterpane on it. And then they get breakfast and a shower. And this starts at the beginning of November, and they were trying to get them, local people, to realise this was going on. And I've only just learnt that, and I've lived in the area 40 years. So that was the comment, so to speak. The question was, you say you try to get the companions into work. What sort of work? I know that there are, in France, Emmaus shops, warehouses, selling the most wonderful array of plates, bedsteads, clothes.
Right, exactly the same.
Friends of mine picked up for €2 sweaters when we were freezing in France.
Yes, no, we too. The business of Emmaus is house clearance and recirculating as well as recycling. So we earn our own keep. That's how we can make such an amazing return on social investment. Just a word about. There is a danger, I think, in churches giving one night a week or 3 nights a week for 3 months a year to selected or homeless people, because, the longer you work in it, the more you realise that there have got to be pathways back, because it can be a not uncomfortable lifestyle to take your benefit, have a nice billet where you can go to every night, do a bit of shoplifting in the morning to sort of, up the sums that you've got, and then spend the rest of the day, in various sort of shelters that you come to learn about. It is not, it's not sort of Florence Nightingale stuff. There are some hugely troublesome, difficult, and very often disagreeable, people who are homeless, just like us.
Yep.
Peter Bottomley from the House of Commons, and I apologise, I had to go back to vote at 7 o'clock. Two comments from Emmaus companions. Yeah. One said, it wasn't what I was given, it was what I was able to give. And the other said, it gave me something to live for. My question, going back to when you tripped over George's feet in Cambridge, roughly how many key people does it take to get a community going?
To start it up, Peter, or to start it up, you need a chair who's got a network. You need people who can access money and who have a passion for the ideal. And I think you also need a receptive and positive local government.
Thank you.
Hi, my name's Hannah. I work for Spurgeon's, but I volunteered for Battelle as well, who I think do similar things in Madrid. My question is, I was really inspired by your story of being a student and that kind of transformational experience of kind of what I understood from it, and correct me if I'm wrong, is kind of the working alongside people who weren't like you and who had really different journeys and really different backgrounds was something that really spoke to you. And I know that that's what's changed my life, is kind of coming into contact, that real integration of people who aren't like you and who have come from different places. And I guess I just wanted to hear from you how you track and mobilise the volunteers who come alongside the companions that work at Emmaus, and what their story is and how you're trying to kind of build that work as well.
I think I have to, if I'm really honest, in my own case, it was a sort of a combination of opportunism and the chance to learn. I mean, I had done 2 years national service as a Chinese linguist, and I was suddenly expected to read French and German, never having been to either France or Germany. So there was a dramatic need to do something, even when, I could read the set text, but I couldn't ask for a cup of coffee or, a glass of wine. So that had to be remedied. Secondly, I think what got me in the end was because I was sort of driven into a corner where my trade was helping people build and grow businesses. And I knew what the answer was, and I could see no way out of it. There was no sort of Damascene conversion, I'm afraid. It's just that my self-respect was attacked. And that's why I did it. And then, because at least I'd learned from business that you share things out as much as you can and get more influential people, and number sitting in this room tonight who actually helped make it happen.
But what about the general effect on your volunteers?
The general effect on volunteers, I think your point about engagement is absolutely right. Because if you can see yourself through other eyes, and if you can see other people's experience through your own eyes, it does change. It changes you. And so I think you're absolutely right. By being alongside, by being exposed to things that are out of your comfort zone, makes the difference.
I think we can take 2 or 3 more questions. I think there's a gentleman just there.
Thank you. Paul McCarthy from Speechley Bircham Solicitors. I've got a question. Given the raft of draconian measures going through the immigration bill at the moment that's in the House of Commons, how do you see social policy affecting the role of Emmaus in the future, and especially in relation to illegal migrants in the UK who may be turfed out of their house because they can't show leave to remain?
Every community we have keeps a number of places for what the French call the sans-papiers, people with no documents, because we can't claim housing benefit for them, so they are a cost to the community, but we insist on having this basic level of care, quite inadequate, I might add, in terms of dealing with what is a serious problem to which, frankly, I don't know the answer. Government has excluded Emmaus communities from some of the more stringent legislation attached to housing benefit and others. But, of course, you know, if you don't have any papers and if you're an illegal immigrant, we're as vulnerable as the next person. And we don't know the answer.
Okay.
Hi, my name's Dorothy and I work for a small homeless charity in Brighton. And I was talking to a teenager that we work with who's in supported housing the other day, and he was having a conversation with a couple of street homeless teenagers who kind of were implying that he shouldn't use the service because he has a roof over his head. And his answer to that was that being homeless is not having a home where you have family and you're loved. And I just thought it'd be interesting to hear your definition of homelessness in that sense.
It's a very interesting point you raised. There's a street homeless guy whom a lot of Cambridge residents will know called Dave, who went through years of attention from social care, and he has odd moments, but they gave him a flat, and the flat immediately sort of became a drinking club for other street homeless guys, so he prefers to live rough again and has his own sort of hiding places and people who've got to know him and look out for him. And he has a particular way of asking for money. He'll come up to you and say, he says, have you got 79p, please? And you say, well, Dave, no, I don't need a quid. I need 79p. I've got enough for a meal. You know, can you? Yeah, you're lost, but he means it.
And do you I mean, going back to what I was saying earlier about public attitudes, do you think that people prefer a kind of romantic image of homelessness? They prefer the image of someone who's just like them, who just happens not to have a home,
Absolutely.
and that's what they want to give to.
Absolutely.
When you say, well, there's this guy, he got a flat, and then he kind of ballsed everything up, and now he's back on the street, and he's in a habit like this, but, you know, actually, he's still a human being, and he still deserves...
And he wanted that, of course.
And he wanted
in this
that.
case. But you're quite right.
Then
There is an idealism, and one of the saddest things about Emmaus in particular is that all the translations of Emmaus literature have been sort of, plaster saint sort of stuff, Abbé Pierre, the human factor and the difficulties of growth. We very recently translated, Emmaus had the courage a few years ago to commission a serious social historian to write the history of the movement in France. It was quite difficult to persuade the international board that we should be allowed to do this, because it really is a warts and all growth, and the very serious problems of growing charities, the internal fighting, the embezzlement that went on, I mean, it's a complex and tricky issue. We've produced it now because I think ultimately you have to tell the truth and the difficulties of doing things.
Which you did in your speech. I think we've got two more questions. There's there.
My name's Claire Godfrey. I come from St Albans. My husband is actually a trustee of Emmaus St Albans. But there's one thing that Matthew Taylor raised, which I've never thought to ask before, and that is that homelessness perhaps is a symptom. And I'm wondering, when the companions are living in the community, do they get any other kind of support apart from the active work that they do, such as support for their...
They actually do. We have, as it were, a sort of a long discussion with companions when they've got over the initial trauma and have been fed decently for a few days, about what it is they want for themselves. And they might not know immediately, but that discussion goes on, and we try and create with them a pathway. Do they want to go out? Do they want to train for something? And when somebody has shown that, they fit, as it were, or they've been there for 6 months and they've endured it, then we fund educational programs, vocational training programs, and anything we can do to try and help them grow and achieve what for them is a meaningful goal. And we'll support them even in accommodation outside the community.
Alcoholism or mental health, is there any kind of support for that?
Yes, we have counsel. I mean, mental health, huge problem. Some mental health problems we cannot deal with schizophrenics because the nature of that illness just sets a community which is always very fragile, just absolutely on its edge. So we would generally try and refer those people on. And generally speaking, the social services who very often refer people to us now are wary of that. They still sometimes pass the parcel, but
we're becoming slightly more skilled at doing that.
We've got 3 last questions, and I will take them all together, and we'll hopefully between the two of us we'll remember them all, Selwyn. So there's a gentleman there, and then there's a person at the back I'm taking, so he's got a cheeky grin, and there's somebody there. Okay.
I'm Ian Kent. I'm a resident of Cambridge, known Selwyn for some time. Selwyn, I think you've demonstrated beyond a shadow of doubt that there's a successful business model in Emmaus, and the returns are extraordinary. It's taken 25 years to roll out to 25 sites.
Yeah.
I mean, why? Well, what's been constrained? And what is the constraint going forward? And why can't we get this thing going faster?
Hold on to that. Yep.
My name's Lucian. I'm the outreach coordinator in Brent, the street homeless outreach coordinator. And in our borough, like most London boroughs, the pathway into emergency accommodation is through verification, street verification. So if a referral is received, there needs to be street verification by an outreach team in order for that person to access emergency accommodation. And that's the case throughout London. The reasoning behind it is because we receive so many referrals, we need to be absolutely sure that this person is street homeless. I've often thought that in 20 years' time we'll look back on that and we'll say that was extraordinary that we requested that people continue to sleep rough on the streets in order for us to verify that they're actually genuine. I was wondering if you had this similar thought, really, that in 20 years' time we might look back on the same thing and say, I can't believe we used to use that as a procedure, basically.
Okay, thank you. And then finally?
Hello, Simon Clifford, Connecting the Dots. Really picking up on the earlier point, when you say you have an £11 return for every pound spent, how much money would it take to really address the problem to sort of 90% or to the extent that it could be addressed? What is the shortfall to really max this out to get the maximum return? If there was a
Is that because you might be able to fund whatever he says?
Well, somebody.
You look to me like somebody. This could be the moment you can answer this question over here.
How much do you need?
Well, Ian's question and yours. It is, and it has been, a slow and frustrating business because, as I tried to say in my talk, without a platform on which to stand or shoulders on which to stand, Abbé Pierre had a huge following in France. He was charismatic. He did a national broadcast. A lady dies in the street clutching an eviction notice. Huge emotional appeal from a war hero, at a critical time. And it achieved it was called the revolution of kindness. So in a sense, you need a revolutionary leader or somebody who in our society could achieve it. And you will know from having been my boss, I'm not that guy. But
you've not done badly, so.
Well, it's about, I did all that I could because it is the most business-like charity, I think, that I know. But it comes down to networks, it comes down to charisma, it comes down to rank, and it comes down to position. Because the statistics I cited are serious, but if we were able to have 130 communities, let's say another 100, that cost us 150 million. Yeah? We could have a pretty substantial dent in the problem, because there's a knock-on effect in communities. I mean, one of the most interesting things about Emmaus communities is that, the Sainsbury's shoppers take in the stuff that they don't want anymore, and the single-parent families in need of furnishing an empty flat get it for less. So there are bargains at every level, and people sort of feed off each other's needs, and it just somehow pulls a community together. It's a phrase that's bandied and very often abused, but actually they do help bring about some form of feeling within a community that is generally beneficial to the social health of that entity.
I'm wondering whether you might, perhaps in drinks afterwards, speak to the gentleman about the needing to prove you're homeless point, because we kind of run slightly out of time, but he'll find you afterwards, which is a way of me saying, if I didn't call you for questions, I'm sorry, but the good news is that there's a drink to celebrate this event downstairs in the Benjamin Franklin room, which is immediately below this room, so do stay, have a drink, celebrate with someone, and ask him any questions that you didn't ask or that he wasn't able to answer. So Selwyn, this Albert Medal is really a reward for unsung heroes. It's supposed to really offer people encouragement for their future career. So I hope you'll see it as this, because our view here at the RSA is that you've got a great future ahead of you. And we look forward to welcoming you back in 20 years when you have indeed got your 150 communities. It sounds to me like Gareth Bale's transfer fee is what you need to be able to go nationwide. That's one way of thinking about it. So thank you all for coming, for asking so many great questions, and it only remains for me to ask you to join me in thanking our splendid speaker and Albert Medal winner, Selwyn Image.